right, where he met his wonderful wife, Kara, who is a PCUSA pastor. So he's got 2 children. One is at Seton Hall University doing a program of kind of like a UN program to maybe be a diplomat. I asked him specifically because he mentioned that. I'm like, how did your son get to Seton Hall from Minneapolis? And that's what I heard. His daughter is at Concordia College as well. He was recently the main speaker at Columbia Presbyterian Church in Vancouver, Washington for their series. And I think doing similar material, is that right? Sure. Jesus or evangelism in a secular age. And he doesn't like this out very much, but he does. He's officially, even though he's raised a Lutheran, he's officially a member of a Presbyterian church. Although I do have it on good authority, it is wishy-washy. So I'm kidding about that because his wife is the pastor of that church. I'm sure it is just rock solid in many, many ways. And I figured we'd play a little game just to get to know you a little bit. Don't think about these too much because I certainly didn't. Okay. So just give me your first response on these. Are you ready? Coke or Pepsi?
Coke.
Okay. Ice cream or cake?
Ice cream.
Okay. Yeah. Netflix or HBO?
HBO. Yeah.
Excellent. Since you're from Minnesota, Vikings or the Twins?
The Vikings. We hate the Twins right now. We wanted to sell the team. Yeah.
All right. Mountain or beach?
Ooh. Probably beach. Yeah.
Okay. Obadiah or Malachi?
Obadiah.
All right. Calvin or Luther? It's all right. Be honest. You can be honest. We love everybody here. We understand the gospel is very wide range.
The theologians that I want to be with are those who I want to have a beer with. And I do not want to have a beer with Calvin. So annoying. Luther would be very fun to drink with.
Okay, very good. That's all I have. So just come over here, may I put my hands on you as I pray for you? Let's pray for you. Almighty and gracious God, we thank you that you are here amongst us. Lord, we thank you for setting aside this wonderful time for us to come and to learn. And we thank you for Andy and just the blessing that he is to many students at Luther, and now the blessing we know he will be to us during this week of teaching. God, I pray that you would just anoint him with the power of the Holy Spirit from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet as he comes and helps us to understand how to evangelize, how to communicate who you are in the age in which we are living. We pray all this in Jesus' name and in the power of the Holy Spirit. And all God's people said, Amen.
All right, well, it is great to be with you. And so we're just going to jump right in. And I have a big question for us to focus on today. So both sessions we'll try to answer this question. And I think it's an existential question. I mean, I think we all kind of feel this in one way or another. And the question is just, why does it feel so hard to be in ministry right now? Or why does it feel so hard to be leading a congregation right now? Or why does the denomination we're in feel so tense? So I hate it. I absolutely hate it when someone says, I have a question for you, and then says, Friday morning, I'll answer this question. Or before you leave, I'll answer it. So we're just going to answer this right off the bat. The reason maybe ministry feels so hard right now is because of the secular. All right, well, we're finished. Thank you very much. It's been great to be with you. All right, so here's the problem. Whenever you say the answer to anything is the secular, it only just takes a bit of scratching under the surface to realize that is a very complicated word. And if I were to put you into groups and ask you to give your definition of the secular, very quickly we'd come to a lot of overlap. I think we have a kind of shared understanding of what that means. But it wouldn't take very long until we would realize that the way one person's defining it and the way the other person's defining it is quite different. So what I want to do with my time today is try to unfold this word, try to get a concept of what we mean by the secular, and see if that might help us as we think about the practice of ministry. But also I think there's even something more at stake here. I think if we don't have a good definition of the secular, that even out of our best intentions, we may make matters worse. Even out of our best intentions, we may make matters worse. So let's unfold this word, but to do this, I want to tell you a story. And to tell you a story, I have to take you back in time. I asked the people here at the camp to have the time machine ready, and they said, unfortunately, it's broken. It's not working. So you're going to have to do this in your mind, but we're going to have to go back in time. This is not just a historical story. It's also really a story about imagination. But we do have to go back in time. So I want to take you back away from North America. We're going to go to continental Europe. We're going to go somewhere kind of cool, so let's go to Paris. And let's walk the streets of Paris in the 14th century. And let's walk the streets of the Latin Quarter in Paris in the 14th century. If we were to walk the streets of Paris in the 14th century, we would be in a society where there was no secular. There was no such thing as secular. If such thing existed as a dial of the secular, it would be set at 0. Now, people weren't dumb or ignorant. They knew when they went to the cathedral and took the Eucharist that the wine in the priest's chalice was a sacred thing. And they knew when they went home to their farms and they worked the land that the shovel, that the hoe that they used was a profane thing. And by profane, I don't mean bad or gross. I simply mean not used in holy activity. They knew the difference between those things, but for the most part, it was one whole cloth. Everything was interconnected. And it was nearly impossible to not believe in a society like this. I mean, the way you dressed, the way you talked, everything just radiated a perpetuation of belief. It just was obvious. It floated in every structure, in every form of action within the society. As a matter of fact, as philosophers will tell us, we didn't even have a word for someone who didn't believe in God at this time. I mean, it was possible, but it was very rare. I mean, the word atheist doesn't really come around until the 19th century. It was very hard not to believe in this kind of society. There are a few outliers who can do it, but it's very, very difficult. As a matter of fact, this is a statue that's in Venice, Italy. I always try this. I say, does anyone know who this is a statue of? No one ever does. And if you know who this is, I worry for you. Because that means your hobby is like looking at Google images of statues. And if that's what you're into, have fun. But that's a really weird hobby. But this is in Venice, Italy. You can find it off the Grand Canal. And this is a statue of a man named Paolo Sarpi. I don't know if you know who Paolo Sarpi is. You'd have to be a history nerd to know who Paolo Sarpi is. One of the facts of Paolo Sarpi that will really get you going this morning is he was the dissenting voice at the Council of Trent. All right, now you're getting really, really tired. More interesting point about Paolo Sarpi is he was Galileo's friend. So Paolo Sarpi was the person who encouraged Galileo to write his book that the earth moves around the sun, not the sun around the earth, that got him in very big trouble with the Jesuits in Italy at the time. But like I said, you can find this statue, and if you find it, you will walk up to it, and you'll see it sitting on a pedestal, and there'll be a plaque on that pedestal. And this is what it says. It says, Paolo Sarpi, date of birth, date of death, and then there's a quote in Italian. So you'll need a hunky Italian man to translate for you. So I've just given you a pickup line if you need it. You can send me an email of thanks later. But this is what it says in Italian. It says, Paolo Sarpi, the only unbeliever of his generation. Wow. That's remarkable. And we went back to the 14th century. This is the early 16th century. If you die in the early 16th century and you don't believe, you get a statue. I mean, that's pretty amazing. I would imagine if there was a statue for every unbeliever in the Bay Area, the traffic would be really bad because there would just be statues all across the freeways. But in this kind of society, it was nearly impossible not to believe in this kind of secular zero society. And I only know one thought experiment that's tried to imagine what it would be like to be us, late modern people, and go back to something like secular zero. Or within a late modern ethos to kind of thrust into that milieu, thrust a kind of secular zero perspective. It's an actually dystopian novel turned into a TV series called The Handmaid's Tale, which really is a thought experiment by Margaret Atwood, who wrote this novel, imagining what would happen if a society like America went all the way back to secular zero. Now, the fascinating thing about Margaret Atwood is she's Canadian. So she's imagining that America falls, that America is no more. And a far-right religious group has taken America all the way back to secular zero, renamed what was America Gilead. Now remember, America no longer exists, but remember she's a Canadian author. And I think this is in dystopian literature, but actually, if you know Canadians, it's actually fantasy literature. Do we have any Canadians here? Yeah. You Canadian? All right, so Canadians, nicest people that ever existed. But if you get a few Molsons in them, they will admit that one of the greatest fantasies they could ever have is America not existing, or, like in the novel, existing in Toronto. That is the most luscious feeling they could ever imagine, that America existed as a little group in Toronto. Again, they need a couple Molsons in them, and they'll apologize 3 times before they will admit that. Yeah. But it's this dystopian piece, and Margaret Atwood thinks it's an absolute nightmare that this could happen. That you could be a late modern society and you could go back to secular zero. But if you watch the TV series, and my official review of the TV series, season 1's great, season 2's good, season 3's okay, and then it gets really bad. But first 3 seasons are really interesting. Season 1 is incredibly fascinating, and it's frightening. I mean, if you want to not sleep for a week, you watch this, because you are streaming it constantly, so that's breaking into your sleep. But also, it's just frightening. It's frightening to imagine that you could go back to this. But these women, who are the kind of center of the show, they go all the way back to secular zero. In the way you talk, the way you dress is your station before God. The liturgy has to be enacted, not just within the worship space, but in every part of society. So in the first season, these women go to the supermarket, and they have to reenact the liturgy. They have to say, under his eye, or may the Lord open. That you have to continue to perpetuate this form of belief, and you can't really escape it. That's the whole plot of the first season. They're trying to leave Gilead, but you can't. It creates this incredibly knit together kind of societal cloth that you can't get out of. Now, like I said, Margaret Atwood thinks it's an absolute nightmare. She thinks it is fodder for dystopia to be late modern and go all the way back to secular zero. Now, she thinks it's a nightmare because you have to have at least 3 things to exist in a secular zero society. You have to have at least these 3 things. You have to have a deep sense that the world is an enchanted place, that there are demons and devils everywhere, that there are angelic forces at work, and they are moving within the world. You have to have a deep sense of enchantment. Connected with that, you have to have a sense that things that you can touch and that you can feel, could be imbued with either a divine force or an evil force. And if you get close to those things, the self is so porous that if you're near those things, the evil or the good inside of that thing can radiate into your own being and affect your own being. You have to have at least all 3 of these things to live in a secular zero world. Now, there's a great book written by a historian at Oxford named Keith Thomas, who wrote this book called Religion and the Decline of Magic. One of my favorite stories he tells in that is during the 13th century in England, there was a major controversy going on. And the controversy going on is that they realized people were going to the cathedral to take the Eucharist, they're having the host put in their mouth, and then they were holding the host in their mouth and not swallowing it. They were leaving the cathedral with the host still in their mouth, they were going home, and they were feeding it to their sick pig. They were taking it out and crumbling it and putting it on the soil of their field. Not because they were denigrating it, but because they held it to hold magical power. And if you needed that pig to survive so your children would live, why not feed it a little of Jesus' flesh? If you almost starved to death last year because you had a very bad crop yield, why not put a little Jesus of flesh on the soil to get a better crop yield? Well, you can imagine bishops, cardinals, priests, very, very uncomfortable with this. So they call a meeting, and the West Coast Pastors Conference theme of that year was how to get people to swallow the host. You're like, my gosh, I got to be there for that. This is the most interesting thing I can imagine. So people walked all running and walked for days to show up to this thing. They get to the meeting and they're thinking, what are we going to do here? Well, some genius in the room raises his hand. They call on him and he says, well, I have an idea. Why don't we make people stick out their tongues and show us that they've swallowed the host? So now if you've watched an Italian or Irish gangster movie, especially in a kind of Scorsese-esque kind of film, you know there's always a scene where mob boss kills all rivals on the same day as daughter's first communion, and you get the perfect Scorsese symbolism of spilled blood and spilled blood. So you get the scene where the mob boss is in church, communion is happening, words of institution go over the elements, and then, of course, splits another scene, bang, 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 blood splattering on the wall as enemies get killed, but mob boss comes to the front, hands go behind back, tongue goes out, priest, only one who can touch the host, touches it, puts it on mob boss's tongue, swallows it, and then like a 4-year-old with a sore throat at the doctor's office shows the priest that they swallowed it. In some Catholic communities, this is held on since the 13th century. Now the other thing they did is ramp up the rhetoric. They left that meeting and said, we need to remind people that the host is the most holy thing we have in all of Christendom. And if you misuse it, well, I mean, you'll burn in hell forever. So remind people not to misuse it. For the next 100 years, it became church law that you had to take communion twice a year. And most people took it twice a year. They were absolutely frightened. I mean, just frightened going before it, as this holy thing would touch their sinful body. But it was better than the alternative, which the alternative was, if you did take communion, then you surely would burn in hell forever. So you had to risk it. You had to go before. I mean, people in our churches would think that we are the weirdest people. I mean, if people from the 13th century could listen through a wormhole and hear us talk, and hear people like in my church say, oh, the most meaningful thing in my whole worship life is communion. I just love taking communion. It's so meaningful to us. They would think we were the weirdest people who ever existed. They would think we were sadistic. It'd be similar to being in a Bible study this week and having someone say to you, I just want you all to know, before we start here, that I'm going to have surgery on Thursday. And I just want you to know, I just love surgery. I mean, I just love the whole thing. I mean, I just love it. Just the, anesthesia, there's a small percentage chance I might not ever wake up. I just love that. I mean, it's just the whole process of that, of not being awake and not being asleep, not being here or there, and then having some stranger I don't really know cut my body open. I just love that. I mean, just the whole process of it, I just love. If they said that, you would think psychological review is needed. This is how our ancestors would think of us saying how much we love communion. They thought it was frightening. They thought it was absolutely frightening. Now, I have a son, which we said is a junior at Seton Hall, and I have to announce to you, and I know this will be on YouTube, so I have to be very, very clear about how I say this. Wonderful boy. Great boy. I would die for this boy. Is an incredible human being right now. But from the age of about 11 to about 19 and a half, biggest pain in the butt who ever existed. I mean, great kid. I would die for this kid, but major contrarian. I mean, any perspective I took, he took the opposite perspective. I could say, what a beautiful blue sky. And he would argue with me on how the sky is not blue. I mean, he would argue about anything. I am happy to say the fever has broken, but it took a long time. It was a long 8+ years of dealing with this. So in our church, if you did ask people in our church, like I said, if their most meaningful experience of our congregational life is taking communion together. I mean, we're a small city church, so when we take communion, there's about 60 of us, we can all stand, we have this beautiful moment where we can get into a circle, words of institution go over the elements, basket of bread is passed, cup behind it, and you have this beautiful moment where you look the person next to you in the eyes, say their name, and give them the elements. Beautiful moment. Well, this particular Sunday, my son's about 15. He's at the height of his difficultness. And the basket of bread is being passed around. It's going counterclockwise. We're at about 6 o'clock in this circle, and it's going counterclockwise. And as it starts being passed, he leans over to me in a kind of stage whisper. He goes, hey, is that bread? Is that bread gluten-free? Is that gluten-free bread? Now, you need to know this boy hates everything gluten-free. He cannot stand gluten-free. He doesn't like the texture. He thinks it's a scam. I don't know by who. Big Bread, I guess, is the best. But he hates everything about gluten-free. Well, the real reason is his mother tries to eat gluten-free. So he says it's been forced upon him. So he hates everything gluten-free. So I know this is a problem. And so I don't even look at him and I just nod and say, yeah, I think it is. This is what this kid does. In a louder stage whisper, he goes, well, then I'm out, and he turns around and walks out of church. Now, this is a confession, so as the kids say, don't at me. So this is a complete confession, but I want you all to know it took everything in me to not tackle the boy and beat him in front of the church this day. But think about that incredibly different imagination of a medieval person shaking with fear as they stand before the altar to my 15-year-old son who's like, you know what? The texture of gluten-free, don't care for it, and this is really going to annoy my mom, so I'm going to leave. Very kind of different imagination at play here. So you can see how all three of these play into that story. You have to have this deep sense of enchantment, a deep sense of things being imbued with the divine force. I mean, we forget this. We still, when we go to Europe and tour cathedrals, almost all those cathedrals are not built for function. They are built because they house a thing. You go to Notre Dame, Notre Dame is built because what? King Louis has Jesus' crown of thorns. It's for a thing. Try that at your next capital campaign at your church. Say the reason we need a new wing or we need a new sanctuary is because we have a thing. People look for function in the modern world. They don't look for some kind of housing of a thing. But then the self has to be porous. The best example I have of this, remember the Snickers commercial? This is my favorite Snickers commercial of all time.
Satisfies.
All right, so what you hear there in that commercial, very funny commercial, but what you actually hear is a very late modern commitment, which is a commitment to a buffer. That the self isn't porous, but the self is buffered. You aren't you when you are possessed by an evil spirit, possessed by a divine force. No, you're not you when you're hungry. So you probably, I'm sure one person had this experience this morning, where you walked into this room, don't admit if this was you, but you walked into this room and you said, I hate everyone in this room. Like every single person in this room annoys me. Okay, no one had that experience. Let's hope not. But maybe you did. But what's your response? Your response is not, what is wrong with me? Here I am, an ordained person to Word and Sacrament who is hating other ordained people to Word and Sacrament. You usually think, I need some coffee. I had too many glasses of wine last night. I mean, it's been a rough week getting enough sleep. You usually assume that it's some kind of lack of calories, it's some kind of lack of caffeine, that it's some kind of physiological reality that's doing this. This is the buffer. That we assume it's not the essence of your being. Probably, I hope, that when you came in and you felt that, you didn't think, oh my gosh, my soul is so corrupted. But that would have been exactly how others would have felt before. But you can hear it here. You're not you when you're what? Hungry. Those of us who have had children, and I don't know if you guys had this experience, but your kids would go back to school, and our daughter would come home every day after the first month of school, really first couple weeks, and she would just throw a fit. Like just melt down. Completely melt down. Not once did her mother, the pastor, or her father, the theologian, go, oh no, the devil is close. Let's call a Catholic priest to do an exorcism on her bedroom, because, you know, Lutherans and Presbyterians are going to have no idea what to do. We didn't think that once. What we thought was, new schedule. Super anxious, exhausted from the new schedule. We thought, oh my gosh, you know, they feed these kids. She has lunch at 10:30. By the time she comes home, she's just starving. I think that's probably a better way to interpret it, but it's a very kind of different imagination. So we have this buffer at play. So when we think about the church and we think about the pastor in a secular zero world, what really is the kind of framing of the good pastor, if you will, or the good priest in this kind of perspective, is access. It's about giving people access. Access to the Holy Sacrament, to the holy things, access out of the demonic, into the holy. It becomes all about a deep sense of access. Now I share all this with you because whatever the secular is, particularly in its Western derivative, whatever the secular is, it comes out of this world. It comes against the background of this world. Whatever Western secularization is, it comes from a world, and it is the child of a world where belief used to be everywhere and everything. Where you couldn't escape it. There was no way around it. It was everywhere. It just hung on everything. It was in every molecule. And yet, whatever the secular is, it comes from this reality. Now, what the secular is, or how it starts to come about, we could call this the arrival of secular one. Now, it comes with this incredible change in our imaginations. I mean, quite an incredible one that we all live with, and I think is all in our imaginations, with this division in our imaginations between what is public and what is private. That there's a public reality and there's a private reality. Now think about it like this. Someone in your life, I don't know, maybe it was your aunt, your grandmother, your grandfather told you that when you go to a dinner party, there are 4 topics you should never talk about at a dinner party, right? So the first thing you were not supposed to talk about is that you were not supposed to talk about money. You'd be at a very weird dinner party if someone came up to you. You'd be very rude if you walked up to someone, just meeting them, and said, yeah, hey, you're new to this conference, and you saw someone say, oh, who are you? Oh, nice to meet you. So tell me, how much money do you make? I mean, you'd be very weird. The second thing you're not supposed to talk about was politics, right? We weren't supposed to talk about politics. Pretty hard in our day and age because politics has now become entertainment, so it's kind of like some places are like, what else do you talk about? But still, I think we try to avoid it. Not supposed to talk about politics. Third thing, I think it's held on pretty strongly, not supposed to talk about sex. You are at a very weird party if someone comes up to you and says, hey, nice to meet you. Tell me a little bit about your sex life. But you are at a very weird party, probably with Dr. Freud. Very, very strange. But the fourth thing you were not supposed to talk about was religion. So there are the 4 topics: money, politics, sex, and religion. Why are those the 4 topics you're not supposed to talk about? Those are the 4 topics you're not supposed to talk about because it's presumed that those 4 things are private. And polite people do not talk about private things in public. This is a radical change in our imagination. When belief becomes a private reality. When belief becomes a private reality, we've entered into a very new realm. And it shatters. In some ways it shatters the reality of enchantment, but it for surely overcomes the reality of the thing, and the self becomes more porous. I remember when this happened a few years ago. It was one of the more annoying days in all of social media, and there have been legion of annoying days on social media. But remember when we got word, I don't know what it was, maybe early afternoon, that Notre Dame in Paris was on fire? So everyone had to post their picture of them at Notre Dame from like 20 years ago. And it was what the kids call a flex, you know, because like, we get it. You were in Paris once, you know. Everyone had to do that. But this was the news story that evening. And I want you to listen to it. It's just about 30 seconds. So they're talking to the woman who is the dean of the Episcopal Chapel in Paris. And listen to how she talks about this. I'm not showing you this because I think she's wrong or to ridicule her in any way, but I want you just to see a very different imagination as she talks about this.
The lady is Dean of the American Cathedral in Paris.
It's brought out in all of us how much we care, not just about the building, which is gorgeous and historic, but about what it stands for. Paris, France, Europe, the world, tradition, Christian faith at its finest. Christian faith that endures.
The Dean is grateful that so many relics survived.
The relics are important, whether or not it really was Jesus' crown of thorns, for instance. Who knows? What's important is that it was a focus of faith, a focus of people's prayers for hundreds of years. So the things themselves are not so important as what they stand for, what they mean to people, the faith they evoke.
At present, the precise...
All right, so you hear it. I mean, in some ways, it's like I paid her to say that. It illustrates this point beautifully. And again, it's not that I think she's wrong. I think she actually may be right. If the camera was in my face, it's exactly how I would answer. But a very different imagination than a second or zero person. I mean, first of all, she says, is it really Jesus' crown of thorns? I mean, is it really, really Jesus' crown of thorns? That in itself is a very modern question. I mean, what would verify it? I would think for me, it was something that would verify it with a DNA test, maybe? I don't know, some kind of Pawn Stars kind of connection to it in some way. I don't know. Like, what would actually verify it? It's a very modern question to say, is it really, really Jesus' crown of thorns? As a matter of fact, some of you will remember this from church history. Do you know how Helena, who was Constantine's mother, found the real cross that she took back to Constantinople? She went to the Holy Land. She went to where, this was before the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was built, and she went to that location, and there was just wood and beams and rocks everywhere. So to verify which was the beam that Jesus was crucified on, what she did is she took a man with her who had leprosy. And she just kept picking up boards and touching it to the man with leprosy, and the one that healed him, she took that beam back to Constantinople as the true cross. Now, as a late modern person, I want deeply to believe in that. Hard for me. When we say what really, 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 we tend to mean some kind of scientific kind of perspective. So first of all, the question, is it really, really Jesus' crown of thorns? Is a very modern question. But what's even more fascinating is she says, doesn't really matter. Doesn't really matter anyhow. Doesn't really matter if it's really Jesus' crown of thorns, because what matters is what it inspired in people. She's not minimizing that, but it inspired something in people. So you see a shift of gravity from what is out there in the thing to what is in here. So we get a move from enchantment to the wills. So from things, enchantment, wills, to, from enchantment and things to the will. Do you will it? Do you consent to it? How do you feel about this? I mean, it feels even not really right. It's not rational, it's not completely subjective, but it is a sense of Martin Luther, here I stand, I can do no other. And so you see the movement goes from what's outside to what is inside. And at the beginning of this, particularly I'm thinking after the Reformation, this really raises the bar. This means we all have to analyze, look internal, look at our hearts, make sure that they're turned towards God. This move to the internal is a certain kind of taking on of Augustine that leads us to have to really, really review our hearts and make sure that they're turned towards God. As a matter of fact, we know as Puritans came over to this country, Puritan women particularly would keep time journals. And we have time journals of Puritan women who would keep track of every second of every day to make sure their hearts are turned towards God. Now, I grew up in a conservative Lutheran denomination, and I'm sad to report that I only remember one sermon from all of my growing up. And that's really sad. I think it proves two things. Maybe it proves that my pastor was not a great preacher. I mean, he was fine, but he basically, in very Lutheran style, only preached Paul's epistles. It was all really justification by faith alone. It also proves that my mind was completely warped by reruns of Gilligan's Island. You know, like I watched so much Gilligan's Island and Brady Bunch. I can remember every Brady Bunch episode, but only one sermon that my pastor ever preached. And that is very sad because I was the nerdy church kid who was there every week. And the one sermon I can remember was the one sermon he went off script, and he did not preach Paul's epistles, but I preached a Jonathan Edwards-esque sermon. Very, very weird for a Lutheran to do, but it was very Jonathan Edwards-esque. I remember the refrain of it, and the refrain of the sermon was, if you waste time, you steal from God. If you waste time, you steal from God. I mean, very much something Jonathan Edwards could have preached. If you waste time, you steal from God. And I remember where I was sitting in the sanctuary. I can remember vividly, and I remember rolling that phrase over and over in my mind. If you waste time, you steal from God. If you waste time, you steal from God. And I remember thinking, my gosh, I'm in 5th grade. I remember thinking that. And then I thought, I've been going to school for 6 years. And I thought, I hate school. I hate everything about school. All I have done for these 6 years is I have become a time-wasting savant. That's all I do. I go to school from 8 to 3 every day, and all I do is waste time. I smuggle in Sports Illustrated, I pass notes, I have a whole repertoire of daydreams I go through. That's all I do. And now here was my pastor preaching, if you waste time, you steal from God. Well, that was his one Jonathan Edwards sermon. He just went back to Paul's epistles and justification by faith alone. But very much so at the beginning of this, especially in the Low Countries, you can think in the kind of reform countries, this became a big deal. This is what the priesthood of all believers in some sense meant. What it would mean now to raise the bar for us all to have to live as a priest. Now, at a Lutheran seminary, my students, one of their favorite Lutheran doctrines is the priesthood of all believers. Even though Luther barely ever used it, but it's inspired from some of Luther's stuff, and they like it. But the way they usually interpret the priesthood of all believers is some kind of authenticity meets flat democracy kind of perspective. So basically, priesthood of all believers means no one can tell me what to do. You know, like I can do whatever I want. And surely no cleric can really tell me what to do. That is not what the priesthood of all believers means. What the priesthood of all believers means is that now everyone, we're all priests. We do not offsource the life of prayer to those weird people on the hill who pray for us all day. Now you have to do it. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you have a holy vocation, or you milk a cow, or you change diapers, or whatever vocation you have. It is now a holy vocation done to God, and you need to do it as you pray without ceasing. You need to read your scriptures. We all raise the bar. So this movement to the will at the beginning absolutely puts a demand on all of us. That now we have to be very aware of our internal constructs. Do we have our hearts turned towards God? But you see, it's a very different imagination from the gravity being out there in the thing to now in here. Do you consent to it? Do you will it? Now this, because at the same time, or from the same imagination, the modern denomination gets birthed. And by the modern denomination, I mean what we're living with right now. So I mean like the PCUSA, like the ELCA, like the United Methodist Church, like the Episcopal Church. All these modern denominations get kind of created in this kind of imagination. And they all live with a deep, deep awareness. And the awareness that everyone within a denomination knows, and every denominational leader knows, is that all modern denominations can only exist for one more generation. They can only exist for one more generation. Now let me be clear on what I mean by that. I don't mean that the PCUSA will only exist for one more generation. I mean every modern denomination has to have the next generation willfully decide to enact their life inside that denomination, or the denomination will not exist. If the next generation does not decide to be PCUSA or to be ELCA, there's no other mechanism that makes sure that denomination exists except the next generation willfully deciding to enact their life inside the denomination. Every denomination lives with that fear. I mean, that's a fear. That's why every mainline denomination I know has an every 3-year youth gathering that gathers the youth of the denomination. Really creatively in the ELCA, it is called the Youth Gathering. That's what it's called. And the Presbyterians are a little more creative. It's called the Triennium. But every 3 years you gather these. And I was at the ELCA one a few years ago, and I happened to be annoying middle-aged man listening to high school girls talk. I didn't mean to be. That sounds very creepy. But I didn't mean to be. But there was, and if you've been to the Triennium or you've been to a youth gathering, whatever, you know it's pretty much just a pep rally for the denomination, you know. And it's really fascinating in the ELCA that at church-wide, the central office, every budget line has reverse hockey sticks. Like every single budget line. The only budget line that has not reversed hockey stick has been the every 3-year youth gathering. It's gone down, but it has kind of gone down at the slant, not as reverse hockey stick. Now, on one level, you can think, wow, they really still care about young people. I think they do. I'm not going to be too crass or too cynical. But they also do know, maybe it's more tacit than explicit, they know if the next generation does not enact their lives as ELCA Lutherans, there will be no more denomination. So they are willing to put millions of dollars into this every 3-year event, and it does become a pep rally for the ELCA, a pep rally for being Lutheran. Every speaker is a Lutheran. The difference that church is making across the world, music, it's always in some big sports arena. So then I became a creepy guy listening to high school girls talk a few years ago in San Antonio. I was in the convention center, and I was just trying to get past these 2 girls. But I couldn't get past them, and it was like day 3 or 4, and they were loving it. You know, they were just so enjoying it. So they were walking slowly through this convention center, and I was very annoyed as I was just trying to get past them. But they were walking too slow to get past. I thought, all right, I'll just wait 50 feet, and then I can turn off. But as they were walking, and I was at annoyance very high, they were just strolling, and one of the girls kicked her friend. You know how you stand next to your friend, and then you do this thing, you know, and kick her friend. So her friend got kicked, and immediately she knew her friend kicked her, but she played it up. And they looked like they were maybe juniors in high school, and in my mind, they were from California, from Southern California. I'm not sure if that's true, but it's more fun to tell the story if they're from Southern California. So the girl got kicked, and she goes, oh my God, like, I can't, like, just believe, like, you just kicked me. Like, she's really playing it up. I don't know if that's good Southern California. I'm getting a very dirty look from the front row from the SoCal people. She's like, I just can't believe you, like, just kicked me. And I'm, like, really annoyed now. I just want to get past these girls. And she gets kicked, and then she goes, I can't believe you just kicked me. And then she said these words. She goes, I can't believe you just kicked me. That is such an un-Lutheran thing to do. And when she said that, I stopped in my tracks. And I said, I'm Lutheran. Like, she didn't get kicked and go, that's a very unethical thing to do, or that's an unbiblical thing to do. She said, that's an un-Lutheran thing to do. And I thought to myself, you know, if her friend would have turned to her, put her arm around her and said, I know we're hearing all this stuff about justification by faith alone, but I want you to know your works really matter. That, folks, would have been very un-Lutheran. That would have been a very un-Lutheran thing to do. But kicking your friend wasn't un-Lutheran, but she got exactly exactly why the denomination was pouring millions of dollars into this event. For 4 days, she was trying on what it would mean to think of herself as a Lutheran. Would it last 4 weeks? Would it last 4 years? Would it last until she's 44? Probably not. But it didn't matter. You got to try. There's no other mechanism that keeps this going. And so you see how the will becomes very important in this dynamic. The second reality here is we shift from living in a cosmos to living in a universe. So when secular one arrives, we no longer live in a cosmos, but live in a universe. I'll show you a slide. I'm not going to do this to you, but one of my favorite pranks to do to a room full of pastors is to show a date like this. There was one in 2018 too. But this is the red blood moon that happened. And again, if I had 200 pastors in here, it's a very fun prank to do, to say, do you remember this date? Do you remember this just a few months ago, not even a month ago, a month and a half ago? Remember when this happened? And I'll say, remember pastors, like you never did more pastoral care calls than the week before this and the 2 weeks after. Remember everyone in your congregation was texting you and saying, Pastor, I need to talk to you. And remember how many pastoral care calls you did? It's a great prank because then everyone starts getting nervous. They're like, wait, I wasn't busy. Were you busy? And then, remember this day how busy you were? I wasn't busy. And everyone started to look around like, what was wrong with my ministry? No one was busy. But you can imagine in a different imaginary again how busy you might be. That when you live in a cosmos, the idea is even the natural phenomena has a message to it. So you can imagine, again, in a different kind of imagination, people texting you, calling you, emailing, saying, Pastor, we're going to talk. I hear there's this super red blood moon. I just interviewed for a job. If I take it, I'm moving the family to Boston. What is God trying to tell me? Is God trying to tell me to take the job or not take the job? Or, Pastor, we're trying to have a baby, but now there's a super red blood moon. Is it safe to have the baby or is it not safe to have the baby? What does this mean, Pastor? What do we think about this? No one, I would guess, really called you and said, I need to talk because there's a super red blood moon. And if they did, you would note potential mental health issues, is what you would presume. But when you live in a cosmos, the idea is even the natural phenomenon speaks. There's a story in it. There's a message in it. There's a larger unfolding of a history going on here. But we no longer live in a cosmos. We live in a universe. And when you live in a universe, you know what this is. We have mathematical equations that will tell us when the next one is. I think the next one will come in 2029 or something like that. This eclipse that will give us this moon that looks red. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. Now some of you might say, wait a minute. It does mean something. I saw that and I was sitting with my friend and I saw it and I was overwhelmed by the beauty. And in the beauty, and when I walk in these mountains, that beauty, it just touches me and I know that there is a God. But of course, the reality is someone could be right next to you, and they could go, well, great, that's great. I'm happy for you. I'm happy for that for you. But it means nothing to them. So even the natural phenomenon and its beauty has to be appropriated internally. It could speak to you. It could absolutely speak to you and become your story. But there's nothing objective about it. This person next to you doesn't mean anything. So you should see it. It is beautiful. You should Instagram yourself with it. But the person who wakes up at 4 in the morning with you is like, yeah, it's not better than sleep for me. It doesn't speak to me. But it could speak to you. So it's not to say it doesn't maybe move you, but now it has to be appropriated internally. Its meaning is not up there. You have to make the meaning. When you live in the cosmos, the whole natural phenomenon has meaning just soaking within it. You read mid-medieval thinkers, and the reality that there's a God. The reality that there's a God are that there are leaves on the trees, and they fall and come back. The whole created world just reverberates this pulse of God's creation. I have to tell you, I want that deeply, and I don't have it. There's very few people who are skeptics who would say, do you believe there's a God? Just look at the trees. That doesn't do anything for me. That means nothing to me. Actually, the more I look at the trees, the more I think maybe there isn't a God. Maybe there isn't a God at all, because it's all answered in this kind of way. So you see the movement again from what's out to what's in becomes really significant here. All right, so where this takes us here is that we move from secular zero, where it's about access, to now the pastor, we'll put this in quotes, the best pastor inside this public-private divided secular one, and the church itself becomes about demonstrate. So you have to think about it like this. It's a very different reality now if you're a pastor in secular one, and we all live with this now. Is now what you do as a pastor is you are a public person who now has to do a public act, like preach a sermon, like lead a Bible study, and you do that and it gets thrown out to the people, and it goes and it hits them or goes past them as private people. And as private people, it's somehow that sermon has to, it's a bit mysterious, but it has to be good enough, funny enough, engaging enough, that it can cross the boundary from being a public act to go into their own private constitution and rearrange their own private beliefs. But how will you ever know? How will you ever know? It's private. Well, you'll know because they'll come back to the church and demonstrate that their private belief publicly. The congregation will be a public place where you demonstrate your private beliefs. You will do that by, signing up to be a member. You will do that by volunteering to teach Sunday school. You will do that by pledging to give money. So the quote-unquote best congregation becomes the congregation where the most people are demonstrating publicly what they privately believe, and the pastor is the public person that somehow has to get into people's private constitutions and lead them to make public acts. You see how the whole cycle kind of works. And you kind of do it very mysteriously because you are not allowed into people's private lives. There is full-fledged vampire logic here. Remember when every TV show like 10 years ago was a vampire show? It was all sexy vampires. We were being drowned in sexy vampire TV shows. So I watch those shows because I watch a lot of television. I tell myself it's for research purposes. It's not. It's because the TV raised me. So if you had an aunt who raised you, you'd spend 6 hours, a night with it too, or thank your aunt for raising you. That's why I spend 3 hours with TV, and I kiss it before I go to bed and thank it for its service. But by watching all those shows, what I learned is in this vampire logic is that you are not allowed, I didn't know this, but every show was doing it, you are not allowed, a vampire, the sexy vampire is not allowed to come into your house, like cross the threshold of your house, unless you invite them in. If you invite the sexy vampire in and say, oh, come on in, sexy vampire, I have coffee ready for you, then you can get eaten and killed. But if you say you are not welcome in here, the vampire cannot come in. Same logic for the pastor in this modern age. If you want to be the sexy vampire, you can be the sexy vampire. But the logic is the same. You are not invited into people's private lives. If you doubt that, try it. After church on Sunday, go up to someone and say, hey, I've been noticing the way you're raising your 14-year-old. Don't like it. Don't think you're doing a good job. Think you're making a lot of bad decisions here. And they will say, excuse me, pastor, thank you for your opinion, but we didn't ask for it. And no, that's none of your business, pastor. Now, you also know that their 14-year-old could be in crisis. They don't know where to turn, and they will open the door to their private lives and invite you in and look for your wisdom. But until they say, come on over the threshold into our private lives, you are not allowed in there. Now, Jonathan Edwards, at the beginning of this, he just went in. It was 3 hours of a sermon of him deep in your private life. But for us, kind of late modern people do not want you in there until they invite you in there. So somehow you have to preach sermons, you have to do the practices of pastoral practice, and you have to do this in a way that kind of goes over the line of the public into the private. And it feels a bit mysterious within how you do that. But you see that becomes a very different kind of manifestation. All right, so I think I'm coming, we're 9:15, right? Or 10:15 is we started at 9:15, 10:15, we're taking a break, right? All right, so what we're going to do here is I'm going to pull the curtain on this, and I'm going to leave you here. This becomes more intense as we go. I'm going to give us another layer of the secular, and then take us to where I really think this creates a challenge for us. Now, I don't know if you watched The Lord of the Rings. I think a lot of us are old enough to have watched The Lord of the Rings in the movie theater. Remember it was like right before Christmas, the first one? I remember watching it, and I sat through it. It was like 3 hours, and then like 3.5 hours, and then Frodo turns to his buddy and is like, we're going to take this ring up the mountain. And then the credits rolled, and I remember being like, wait, what? I sat here for 3 hours for the movie to begin? That's exactly how this presentation should feel, right? I'm just taking you 1 whole hour so that we can come back and we'll really get to where we're going. But we have about 5 minutes, I think, till we need to take a break. Or is it?
Or just do question and answer after your second round.
We can do that too. What would you prefer? All right, let's break and hold your questions, and then we'll take you beyond this. You're gonna be shocked what comes next. But secular 2 comes after secular 1. So we'll break and.
I gave it back to the tech people.
Are you good at catching things?
I'm good at catching.
All right. Let's see if I'm good at throwing.
That's a thing.
Next time, turn it on before you throw it.
Gotcha.
Let me hear the. I remember after the first Lord of the Rings was done, I was with Scott Mann. I was like, bring it on, 6 more hours, let's go. And I hope that's where most of us are at, you know, for the next thing. So we do have some snacks, I think I saw it delivered out here, and we're doing small groups next. And there's a couple things different this year. You might notice that because we're in Newton Memorial. And we're also going to have some extra time for small groups tomorrow, more than we are used to having. But that's what we're doing next, is grab some snacks and then sort of initiate your time with small groups. And this was supposed to be Hope's job. And Hope assured me that everybody is in a small group. And so I hope that that's true. Yeah, and hope is the operative word. But if you're not in a small group, please come catch me and we'll try to source you into a small group. Small groups are important. You may notice, you may not notice, we actually have a list of suggested questions, and so you don't necessarily have to go to your small group and talk about the same thing that you've always talked about in your small group. You can mix it up a bit. We have a lot of places. There's places downstairs. The chairs are all downstairs.